Good to see you. Good evening. We were discussing Parshat Lech Lecha at the last session concerning the Meraglim, concerning the spies, and I think more or less we covered that as best as we could under the circumstances with a limited amount of time. And this week we're going to be discussing Parshat Korach, the embattlement or the sudden division within Israel between two camps. But before we proceed into Korach, I think we'll have a better understanding of what took place there between two factions of Judaism. And I know, in fact, I received a letter today from someone who was an avid reader of all material of the Center for some 17 years, but he says, I think you seem to be lending a great deal of support for the non-Jew and less support for the Jew. And it's not out of design, but if we are to discuss the essence of what is called Judaism, then we naturally refer to the Bible. And there is no greater evidence of what the essence of Jew is than from the Bible. And certainly the picture that has emerged from the Bible doesn't appear to be so favorable towards the Jew. And so again, I feel somewhat at a disadvantage that suddenly here again, I might be accused of being an anti-Semite because I'm going to raise another quarrel, another disagreement, a very serious disagreement that arose within Israel. And we are discussing that generation that witnessed all of the miracles of the 10 plagues, splitting of the Red Sea, etc. And then we're going to be discussing a more serious division within Israel. Not that we haven't met during the course of the Bible, the golden calf and the constant bickering of Jews against Moses. But this one is of a more serious nature. But what appeared to be very strange, however, I think it's going to be a proper introduction to an understanding of what really took place between Korach and Moses and Aaron. Now, for those of you not familiar with this particular incident, I refer to chapter 16 of Numbers, where it says, and Korah, the son of Yitzhar, the son of Kehat, who was a Levi, and also two others whose names were Datan va'Aviram, bnei Eliab ve'on, ben Peled bnei Reuben, and they decided to rise up against Moses, 250 strong. And verse 3 says, and they assembled themselves against Moses and Aaron and said, you take too much upon you. Meaning more specifically that you, Moses, is the leader of Israel. You, Aaron, appointed by your brother, the high priest, and both of you have your origin in the tribe of Levi, and here am I, also a Levite, and I'm to be left on the sidelines, act as a simple Levite, without any of the honors that have been bestowed upon you too. It's almost like nepotism. Yeah. This is a family affair. Everyone takes all of the spoils and all of the treasures and all of the important positions for yourself, and you're leaving us out. This is what, for most who read the Bible literally, seems to be the essence of this argument between the two. And of course, from a Kabbalistic point of view, we're going to raise several questions concerning this incident. Because again, the literal translation of what transpired is, according to the Zohar, completely meaningless. And it doesn't provide us with any kind of message. Certainly, of what interest is it that there, some 3,600 years ago or 3,400 years ago, there was a quarrel amongst the Jews in Israel, as if today we are all of a different kind of breed, and there are no arguments amongst the Jews in the nation of Israel and so forth. So this is one of the incidents that we will be touching upon this evening. Now, strange as it may seem, in the Zohar, which is what we're going to read to make our connection on another level of consciousness to understand the same things, but we know that merely by reading the Zohar, we achieve a greater awareness of the very same essence that we will be discussing. So why not take advantage of the material and tools that have been placed before us? And at the end of Parshat Shlach Lecha, which dealt with the spies, for no apparent reason, the Zohar begins to discuss a subject which took place in Exodus, Leidat Moshe, the birth of Moses. But why would the Zohar suddenly present to us the story of Moses, his birth, how it happened? And I'm referring to page 119 of the Parsha of Shlach Lecha, and I quote, Kol Nevi'im and Nevi'im, and I read it in Hebrew very pointedly because we know that the power of the Hebrew alphabet, more specifically the Zohar, motivates within us the potential, dormant, unfortunately, cosmic consciousness, which is within the minds of all of us, except for many of us, we are not constantly aware of this great potential that is within all of us. So we read the Zohar, and that immediately opens up the door to this internal computer that is called cosmic consciousness of the human being. And it says, Kol Nevi'im and Nevi'im shakadosh baruch hu hekim liYisrael, of all the prophets that the Almighty brought up for Israel, kulam nigale hakadosh baruch hu alehem b'madregot elyonot kedoshot. To all of these people was revealed upper supernal holy matters. V'ra'u ziv yakar hakadosh shel hamelach mimakom elyon. And all of these people saw the stream of light that emanated from the celestial region. And while all of them achieved that kind of cosmic connection, lo karov kemoshe, no one was as close as Moses. Shehaya karov lemelech yoter mikulam, ki chelko haya musha yoter mikol bnei alam. Big why? And he was far above, meaning he had achieved the highest level of consciousness of any human being. Mipnei shekatuv alav pe el pe adaber bo umare velo bechidot. I spoke with Moses face to face, mouth to mouth. However, the Shara Nevi'im hayu ro'im mimakum rachok. They did not they did not perceive that same state of consciousness, but rather from the distance. This is the introduction to the birth of Moses. And I don't want to repeat the story, which is again repeated here for us in the Zohar, but for those of you, you can refer back to Exodus, beginning of Exodus, chapter 2, where much of this is described. Now, what I'd like to touch upon, and it is not coincidental, that this portion that I'm going to read relates very much to the matter that, or let's say the cosmic event that is now present in our midst. It says, "Vatitzpaneo gimel yerachim," that she hid, meaning Moses' mother, hid Moses for 3 months. And I've already explained what does it mean she hid Moses for 3 months, because the Egyptians were such a high spiritual, while it might have been negative, but nevertheless, they were so highly spiritually connected that they could perceive how long a child was in its mother's womb. And inasmuch as the prophets of Egypt knew that a Messiah was soon going to be born, and therefore there was a decree that all male childs born were to be put to death. And so they, whenever they discovered a woman that was pregnant, they could perceive when she would be giving birth, meaning the end of the 9 months, and then they would come and take the child away. And so here it says that Moses, the commentators say Moses was born 3 months before, and therefore she hid him for those 3 months. They did not expect Moses to arrive until 3 months later. And here the Zohar interprets these 3 months as concealed months. Concealed months. Not to take the literal, take the story in a literal sense, meaning she had hid him 3 months, but rather these 3 months, or there are 3 months of a concealed nature. Eluhem gimel yerachim shedin kasher shoreh ba'olam. There are 3 months within every calendar year that din kasher, meaning extreme judgment, extreme negativity, reigns throughout the universe. Umahim Tammuz Av v'Tevet. Tammuz Av v'Tevet. These 3 months, as we are now in the month of Tammuz. In fact, we have entered the period of 3 weeks, meaning the Yemei Mitzarim, which we have already explained elsewhere. And therefore, it is called, the reference of being concealed, meaning the light, which is positive, was concealed and is concealed during these 3 months. So what is the significance of informing us about 3 negative months in relation to Moses? I mean, if the Bible wished to inform us that there are 3 negative months and that we must be careful during these 3 months, you shouldn't undertake something, generally speaking, within these 3 months, meaning, again, the Hebrew months of Tammuz, Av, and Elul. Why is it connected? Or why does the Zohar feel that this aspect of 3 months is somehow closely related to Moses? And so he concludes, Shemiterem shi'arad Moshe le'olam haya nimsa lamala. Before Moses descended to this world, He was above. And because he was always in an elevated level of consciousness, the Shekhinah immediately descended with him at the very moment at the time of birth. V'shamra oto. And the Shekhinah constantly protected him. Mikan amar Rabbi Shimon. Sheharuchot shel tzadikim nimsaim lamala miterem she'ardu le'olam. And therefore, the spirit of tzadikim are always connected, before they even descend, are immediately connected with the upper spirits, and therefore when they descend along with those spirits. These 3 months also are symbolic in as much as they are connected to 3 distinct periods concerning the Holy Temple. The month of Tevet, or Asara b'Tevet, the 10th day in the month of Tevet, the outer wall of Jerusalem was pierced, meaning the Romans entered, they pierced the wall and entered the city of Jerusalem on the 10th day of Tevet. Tammuz, the 7th day of Tammuz, was the time when they pierced the wall around the temple. And 21 days later, in the month of Av, they destroyed the temple. These 3 days, or these 3 months, are, for us, as we understand the cosmos, months that triggered or initiated what happened. In other words, it was not by coincidence that the wall should be pierced around the city in Tevet, or the wall around the Holy Temple was pierced in Tammuz, or Av, the temple was destroyed, because these are 3 negative months. And consequently, this is what took place. And because the Zohar says that Moses never died, and we have discussed this also previously, he never died. In other words, he is as present as we have already discussed concerning the Holy Temple, that the Holy Temple was never destroyed. That it is only for those who live within the illusion, what we call the illusion, the non-reality state, that do not perceive the Holy Temple, cannot see it, and are under the impression, and I must say most Jews are really under the impression that the Holy Temple does not exist. For those who have visited Jerusalem, pray at the Wailing Wall, and it is called the Wailing Wall, but from a Kabbalistic point of view, it is called Wailing Wall because the Jews are wailing and cannot see the temple. What's that? Crying. And so, crying.
Why are we calling it Kotel in Hebrew?
What's that?
It's a wall.
Kotel is a wall.
And wailing?
What's that?
And what is wailing? Crying.
Crying.
Why is it 2 different meanings?
It's the West.
Well, it's called the Wailing Wall, and yet we call in Hebrew it's called Kotel HaMaravi. There is no wailing connected with it. It's called the Kotel HaMaravi. But it has taken on a new significance because for 2,000 years Jews have come there to crying because of the destruction and so forth. And yet, from the point of view of the Zohar, the temple was never destroyed. It still exists. And so maybe it's become symbolic as a wailing wall. That is, the wall is crying because nobody can see the temple. That might be a proper definition of the Wailing Wall. Now, I know this is completely contrary to the common understanding of the temple. And the Zohar says, and therefore he relates these 3 months, that it is only for those who can connect to Moshe, only those who can connect to Moshe, that can achieve this connection with Moshe, who was present and also didn't die, and overcome, and only then overcome, because Moshe, says the Zohar, or the Bishimon, never fell under the influence of the illusionary state. Never. Because that which he had experienced before birth, and there is a tradition that before the brit of a child, there is a Friday night, a little ceremony, which is to commemorate, we'll put it that way, because I don't want to touch on, one day we will touch on the aspect of brit, of circumcision, but right now it is to commemorate the aspect that this little child, who was full of cosmic awareness and cosmic intelligence and cosmic knowledge, received a kind of little pinch here in the lip. And this is again all tradition, and so the child has forgotten, and so there is a kind of avelut that is celebrated at that moment. This is tradition. This is tradition. But for someone like Moses or other tzaddikim, and that's why it says at al sifatayim, I guess Moses didn't have that, and that's what it means at al sifatayim. Did it mean that he couldn't speak? When Moses, you recall, we just touched on it, not completely, when the Lord told Moses, you will be the leader of Israel and you will represent Israel, and he says, but how can I cannot speak. And what does the Lord tell Moses? The one who gives speech. I mean, can't I? Let's say from a very simple, literal translation of the verse, couldn't the Lord heal Moses so that he could speak? Well, I mean, why was Moses questioning his ability if once the Lord had told him, you're going to represent the nation of Israel, you will speak for the nation of Israel, why would he then have some doubts as to his ability to convey the message of the Lord? And the answer is very simple, because we are not discussing here someone who is tongue-tied and can't express himself. It would be a total corruption almost to consider the verse as having that kind of implication. But rather what it meant was that because Moses, in his connection with like all children before birth, Moses retained that cosmic awareness even after birth. And Moses' question was not that I could not translate or impart the message of the Lord, but rather that inasmuch as I'm on another level of consciousness, another level of awareness, it would almost be that when I'm speaking to these Jews, we would not be connecting on the same wavelength. And the Lord's response was, and this is very logical, that despite the fact that you are of an upper elevated state of consciousness, and the Jew is of a lower state of consciousness, however, I could make those two levels of consciousness meet with each other. But it was nothing to do with a physical deformity that existed within Moses. This was Moses, because Moses, says the Zohar, brought with him the reality, the nature of reality, without the illusionary reality that, unfortunately, for most Jews, we are faced with. And therefore, when it comes to these 3 months in particular, Tammuz, Av, and Tevet, if we can implore and make our connection with Moses, who is alive, inasmuch as these 3 negative months, through a mystical connection, seem to relate to Moses for the only reason to tell us, and this is what the Zohar is implying, that Leidat Moshe, the birth of Moses, what does that mean, the birth of Moses? That he retained that level of consciousness that no matter what would happen on an illusionary level of Tammuz Av and Tevet, the Jew, if he knows how, and we do know how, during these 3 weeks, for those of you who have listened to the tape, the Ari has provided us with the connection by which we can rise above this din kasher, this negative cosmic influence that prevails during these 3 months. Because those three months that are that negative can be overcome if we can make that proper connection with Moses, and that connection is made through the 3 secret names of Tadhat, Kuzu, and Mitzpetz. With this in mind, and then the Zohar goes on to this full description. I've given you this in briefly, so as we can go on to Korach. But with this understanding, we now can begin to understand what really was happening here with Korach. Why did he rebel? Was Moses a stupid man? The answer is no. In fact, he was a very wealthy man, and they usually say wealthy people are smart, poor people are stupid. So he was certainly a respected man in the community because he was extremely wealthy. Consequently, he would not have been considered as a stupid individual. Then what did he want? Furthermore, was he that unjustified when he spoke unto Moses and said, look, you're taking it all for your own family. Don't you think it right and proper that you leave something over for us? Was it that terrible? Was it that terrible to the extent that an earthquake came and swallowed up these 250 people? Why should he suffer that kind of consequence? All he was saying is, permit me the priesthood. I, as Aaron, both have our origins in the tribe of Levi. So why him more than me? And for that, earthquake swallowed up completely. Whereas in previous cases of rebellion, and this was not even a case of rebellion, incidentally, he felt that he was entitled as much as anybody else in the tribe of Levi. Why would he have to suffer this kind of dishonor and misfortune of being swallowed up alive? And that never happened before. Never happened before. And I quote from the Zohar, Bore Aaron hu yemin, shehu chesed. Halavim hem small, shehu gvura. What is the essence of Aaron? What was the essence of Aaron? While for those of you familiar with the Sfirot, we know that Aaron was born because of the tribe of Levite. He was considered to be the chariot of the Sfirah of Hod. And Hod represents, if you're familiar with the tree of life, with the tree of the 10 Sfirot, Hod represents left column, the aspect of negativity in the triad. You know, you have the two triads of the Magen David. The lower triad, the left side of that lower triad, is represented by whom? Aaron. So in other words, his point of origin began as a Levite. However, says the Zohar, while the Levite, of which Aaron was the chariot, is represented as the negative force in the Magen David, nevertheless, Aharon hu Yamin. How did he suddenly become Yamin? How did he suddenly become right column? Was he appointed to have the energy of right column? How do you get appointed as a right column energy? Either you're left or you're right. We know that Moses, also in the part of the Zohar that we just quoted, it says his mother saw that he was good. One isn't good, right? Is that what the Torah wants to say? What kind of a mother would she be, especially if she's Jewish, that she says a child is not good? Isn't the Jewish child always the best of any other child that was ever born? So why would the Torah feel that this was something, this kind of exclamation is something of great significance? And the Zohar raises the question too, and answers, inasmuch as his mother, who was Yocheved, was a prophetess, and she could rise above the illusionary reality, she knew the essence of his incarnation. Who was it? Who was he? And so the Zohar says that Yocheved saw, Yocheved, the mother of Moses, saw that he was an incarnation of Abel, Hevel, and inasmuch as within every individual there is good and bad, nevertheless, he originated and was incarnated from the Tov, the good part of Hevel, the good part of Hevel, who was the incarnation of the bad part of Hevel, as we shall learn when we discuss a future Pasha. Who was his brother? Bilam, because Bilam originated from the evil part of Hevel.
Whose brother?
Bilam.
Was whose brother?
Moses, if they both originated, but of course they were not both. They were not, Bilam couldn't make it as a Jew, so they sent him down as a non-Jew. And so he came down as a non-Jew, but nevertheless, from the point of view of their incarnation, Bilam was from the negative aspect of Hevel, and he was from the positive side.
Did Moses have no desire to receive?
Moses, while there was a desire to receive on the part of Moses, since he did return, nevertheless, it was dominated by the aspect of sharing, of positivity.
So there was nothing there for oneself alone.
That's right. That's right. While it was present, but nevertheless, it had no dominion. And Korach, says the Zohar, was an incarnation of Cain. And so, when we raise the question, why suddenly, and what's wrong here, and what's really taking place from the point of view of Korach, he seems to be justified, and for what reason should he be swallowed up? And maybe he should have been entitled to the priesthood. And for what reason should Moses, while it was with the I'm sure with the blessing of the Lord, that Aaron be appointed as the priest, the Kohen, but why Aaron, who stemmed from the left column as Korah? But the Zohar says Aaron was Yamin. He was positive, only for the reason that the Zohar says, rather a minor characteristic of Aaron. For those of you who are familiar with the Talmud and much of the commentaries on the Bible, that Moses was an individual who was always seeking to make peace. Peace. Aharon. I said Moses. Aharon. Aaron was constantly thriving to make peace, whether it was between man and wife, two individuals. That was his objective. Why was that his objective? Because we know when you stem from the positive aspect, as Aaron did, which is chesed, meaning to create a completeness, a wholeness within the universe. If this was his objective, then along the line, in his effort to achieve peace, he was then making his connection to the Sfira of Avraham. What was Avraham? The aspect of sharing. And since he made this effort, Aaron made this effort all along to bring this kind of wholeness to the universe, therefore he elevated himself to the upper triad and connected to the Sfira of Chesed. Therefore he was appointed, says the Zohar, to be the high priest. If so be the case, and this is the reason that Aaron was the high priest, then what was the problem of Korach? What was the problem? What did he want? From the point of view of the Bible, if you translate the Bible as it is, literally, there is no explanation. But along comes the Zohar and reveals to us the internal motivating thought of Korach. Korach ratza lasot chiluf hayamin l'smol. Sheratza hakuna. He wanted the priesthood shehu yamin b'shvil halavim. Mishum ze nenash. What was his sin? The questioning of why Moses was dispensing political offices to others or members of his own family, was that his sin? Says the Zohar, of course not. The question was very valid. If that's all that the question entailed, and if that's all that Korach was raising, why was all of these political honors being reserved for that family and no one else? That was not the problem that Korach was raising. But rather, he was saying that despite the fact that I am of a negative quality, in other words, he was not disputing the fact that Aaron had achieved a level of consciousness of chesed, which is the first sphira of the seven sphirot, meaning he was of a higher level. But he was asking, supposedly, why should the priesthood, which seems to indicate that, what is the priestly family? Blessings, healing, acting as a channel for positive energy. Why couldn't that kind of energy also be channeled through a negative column? In fact, if we are to observe any system of energy on a physical level, it is the negative quality that draws the energy, not the positive one. Even in a bulb, it is first drawn through the negative wire, negative pole, and then ultimately it winds up, which scientists to this day don't understand why, but ultimately energy is dispensed through the positive pole. And they don't know why. But initially, it is the negative pole that draws into the bulb the energy. And so Korach, understandably, was asking, why shouldn't the Leviim, the Levites, who are in essence the negative aspects of Israel, why shouldn't they be the channels for drawing down this energy? And because he raised that kind of question, and this sounds logical, but what is not logical is, why was he punished? Why was he punished? And the Zohar says immediately, Mishum ze nenash. He was punished because he wanted to change. He wanted to change the law and principle of the universe. What's wrong? Maybe he made a mistake. What would be, in essence, wrong if there was no positive pole? I mean, who discovered the bulb? Edison. Why did the bulb become structured as it is? Because in energy, you know, there is positive and there is negative. So you know there are two aspects in energy. But he was saying, why does there have to be two aspects? Why can't there be one? Let everything flow from the negative point of view. And because of that, he was punished. And because of that, the earth opened up and swallowed him. Even according to the Zohar, we would have to delve deeper into the significance of what Korach was attempting here. V'lo od, but that wasn't enough. Ela shenimsa bo lashon hara shediber al Moshe, because he spoke on Moshe, saying, why are you taking all of this for yourself? V'nenash b'kol. What was wrong? What was wrong? But for those of us who have at least learned some of the basic elemental rules of Kabbalah, we know why the world was created. It was created only because of a simple concept called bread of shame. In other words, the centrality and focal point of creation, even in the Ein Sof, originated for only one reason. The Creator wished to share, and he created a vessel to receive. In other words, there was no such thing as right column, left column, central column, no such thing in Ein Sof. There was a Lord who wished to share, and without a recipient, there could not have, or the Lord could not have achieved that aspect of sharing, because if you haven't to whom you want to share, then you haven't shared. So the receiver, which is an aspect of negativity, was created, even in the Ein Sof. And this was the reason for creation. However, because of the aspect of bread of shame, what happened? 3 columns came into existence. 3 columns came into existence. This was the point, and this was the concept, and this was the idea that Korach was making an attempt to undo. Why did he even have to, if we are not speaking now of politics, we're moving away from that idea that this particular section is discussing politics, that Korach is saying, Moses, why are you taking all of the honors for your own family? And so the Zohar says he spoke Lashon Hara. Why did he have to speak Lashon Hara? He was raising a rightful question. Why all of it to one family? Then why did he have to speak Lashon Hara on Moses, saying, you're taking it all for yourself? Why didn't he merely say, what about me? Why not me? But the Zohar has to add that he was also speaking Lashon Hara. Why did he have to speak Lashon Hara on Moses? At this point, again, we must recall that Moses, had achieved a level which is referred to as dat. Dat. For those of you not familiar with that term, it means a connection between the Magen David. It means a connection between the Magen David and what is referred to as Keta Chachma and Bina, the storehouse, the warehouse of energy. All right? That was Moses. He was the chariot for that raw, naked energy. He was the chariot of that raw, naked energy. He represented that aspect that there would no longer be like in the Ein Sof, sharing and receiving. Another concept came into existence, a third column aspect. A third column aspect. Things were no longer simple like they were in the Ein Sof, sharing and receiving. Moses represented that aspect of restriction. Moses represented the essence of why we are here, why we are here in this room. For what reason have we come to this world? To alleviate and remove bread of shame. No other reason. To alleviate bread of shame. And so Korach, who was a very wise man, and not because of his wealth, but he was a wise man, understood that the only way that he can accomplish his purpose, which was to undo the aspect of a three-column system. In other words, who says there's got to be a filament in the bulb? Well, that's the way Edison made it, right? But who says it's got to be that way? Why do you need two poles in it and a filament? Why do you need this aspect of three-column system? He was making an attempt to lead the Jew into an understanding that there was nothing that was important in this world but for the purpose of receiving. Isn't that what the Creator originally intended? The souls of the world to be established? For what reason? Why are there souls? The souls are vessels for capturing energy. No other reason. Korach's attempt was to mislead not only the nation of Israel, but to revert back to what the Egyptians had in mind. If you recall, when we discussed the power of the Egyptians, what are the pyramids all about? It is one essence, that this world is established on one principle, not two principles and not three principles, one principle, to receive. We are here to take. No other reason. Wasn't that the original idea in the Ein Sof? That's the original idea that still continues. Why was there a removal of souls from the Ein Sof to this awful world of misery and wars and whatever? Well, they didn't question why. But nevertheless, what they wanted to accomplish, that means Korach wanted to accomplish the very same thing that the Egyptian or Pharaoh in Egypt wished to accomplish, that this world does not work on the principle of an atom of three essence, but rather on one essence, desire to receive for oneself alone. This was what he had hoped to accomplish. In other words, he did not question the ability of Aaron, that Aaron was a channel for positive energy. But he said, who says that this world should be based on the principle of all energy that is ever to be dispensed with, all energy that is ever to become manifested in this world must work through a restriction and then come down through a positive channel. Let it come straight through the negative channel, like it were operated in the Ein Sof. This was his objective. Because of that objective, in other words, because he again was brought almost like, and the Zohar tells us, as well as the Ari, who was Korach? He was an incarnation of Cain. What was Cain? The aspect of what? Negative energy. What kind of sacrifice, if you recall, in Genesis, did Cain bring? What did he bring? What's that? Pishtin. Flax. He brought flax. Flax is what you make. It's what you make linen from, right? Pishtan. And what was that about? We have discussed it in the past, but briefly stated that Pishtan is an entity that has one quality. It draws and draws and draws to itself. That is the aspect of shatnez. The reason we do not combine flax and linen together, because flax and wool together, flax is linen, flax and wool together, is because wool has an internal essence and characteristic of sharing, and linen or flax has that negative quality. And there is nothing that can act as a synthesizer to combine or make these two work together. There isn't. Therefore, the Torah or the Bible has said that if one wears linen and flax together, what is he doing? He's combining two opposite tendencies, two opposite characteristics, that their internal energy intelligences never cease to be in a battle state. And consequently, if we envelop ourselves in a battle state, this 99% of energy intelligences of what seems to be inanimate objects, a suit of clothes is inanimate, but we know since the atomic revelation that 99% of these inanimate objects, but there's a cosmic dance going on internally. And so linen and flax are constantly at war with each other. And so therefore, not prohibition, but the advisement that it doesn't pay to wear a suit of clothes that combines flax and linen together. This was Cain. This was Cain. Why did he bring that kind of sacrifice? The Torah tells us that God, when he was presented by these two sacrifices of Cain and Abel, right? Abel brought wool, Cain brought linen. He said, no, it's like he favored Abel. Why did he favor Abel? Because the Lord's internal essence is one of sharing, and this was in direct conflict with what Cain was presenting. The aspect of just negative, or the negative aspect of drawing to oneself alone. Therefore, Korach, again, you might say it was unfair. He was an incarnation of Cain, we are told, three people. Yitro was also an incarnation of another level of Cain. There are generally three levels. But Yitro, or Jethro, overcame the purpose of his negativity, of why he again returned to this world. Korach did not want to recognize that liability, that in essence it was something, and that was his tikkun. That was his tikkun to overcome that aspect of negativity. He refused to recognize it. So what happened? What happened? He was swallowed up. You know why he was swallowed up? Now you know why. Couldn't there have been another form of punishment? And in fact, nowhere else is that kind of punishment. And it wasn't really as that severe. What about the rebellion, the spies? The spies, what did the spies incur for the nation of Israel? They're all going to die in the desert. That was terrible. These 250 people rebelled, but they didn't drag down the nation of Israel with them, and they suffered swallowing up by the earth. The spies suffered nothing of any consequence other than they would never enter the land of Israel. But they brought total havoc. These people were destined to die in the desert. They could not enter the land of Israel. This man, with his 250 followers, had a disagreement, a logical disagreement, and yet look at the punishment that was wrought upon him by the Lord. The answer is because he was going to change the essence of the universe, so he thought, and that the aspect of desire to receive for the sake of sharing would not exist, and so he was swallowed up. The earth is symbolic of what aspect? Gravitation. Draws to itself. And so the earth swallowed him up because that was the aspect, what?
The similarity.
That was very similar between him and earth. And he got what he wanted. That's right.
Why is he
Okay.
screaming?
What's that?
So why is he screaming?
Why is he still screaming? Because now he realizes that he was wrong, maybe. That he couldn't change, that the essence of our being and the essence of our reason of being in this world is the aspect of desire to receive for the sake of sharing, not just the aspect of receiving. And this was his tikkun.
But the Creator created us just for receiving. We're
That's
the one
right.
That
That's
stopped.
correct. However, that's right. And this is what he wanted to change,
So
convert the aspect and say, wait a second, we're all in Ein Sof. This aspect of bread of shame is only an illusionary reality. So let's revert back, and the fact he was so noble, let's revert back to the Ein Sof, where all that was, what happened in the Ein Sof? Receiving endlessly, beautiful. Who needs all of this illusionary form of chaos that exists within the realm of illusion?
But it's Adam Rishon that made the mistake. It's not him.
And
he's
he was
trying
going to continue to perpetuate that kind of mistake. That's what he wanted to do. Like the Egyptian in Egypt, he had set upon to change that aspect. So he was not, in essence, speaking of Aaron representing the priesthood. That's not what the Zohar says was what he had in mind. It was not a question of politics, as unfortunately most people reading this particular section seem to believe this is what it's all about. No, it's to show us the essence of what happens when you revert back to the aspect of drawing for oneself alone.
Wasn't he kind of premature? Maybe he was looking into the
He was
phenomena
looking-
of Mashiach?
Yes, we might say that. And I would almost agree with you. I mean, he wasn't really that, wasn't that all wrong, was he? But had the Zohar not also informed me that he was an incarnation of Cain, I would have been, or had a tendency to agree with you.
So that was a tikkun.
But I understand that since he came back for the tikkun of Cain, then why was he here? So that he would express
You had
himself.
to skip it again.
That's right. He wanted to, okay. He wanted to take a shortcut, you might say, but that was not the purpose of his being born into this world again. Okay. We'll have a break, a short break.